I'd like to welcome you all to our session today. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Angel Flores, International External Affairs Manager at World Animal Protection, and today we're going to talk about a just transition in the livestock and fishing sector in Asia, and we'll be building on the Asia Protein Communique, which I will discuss further today. So I think the discussion earlier around fighting the big battles has really shown that working alone is not an option for us. And I think this is the main message of this Asia Protein Communique, working with other organizations and building a common position that we can bring to the UNF's CCC Conference of Parties. So I am joined today by my colleagues at World Animal Protection, and they will be assisting us later when we move into the breakout sessions. So what do we want to achieve in our workshop today? So essentially, we would like to generate a common position if we're able to achieve that in the next hour, and agree some concerted actions to end factory farming based on climate grounds. As Mark has mentioned earlier, the COP28, which will happen in Dubai in November, it's a very ripe opportunity for us to engage, given that one, the global stocktake is happening, and I'll discuss that a bit more later. And second is that the presidency, which is the United Arab Emirates, has already announced that there will be a leaders' declaration which has a focus on food systems and agriculture. So this is going to be the second year where food is going to have a very prominent focus in the climate COPs. So the way that we will structure the next 45 minutes to an hour is that I'll share a little bit of the context in Asia based on the communique that has been developed last year. And then we'll discuss the Asia Protein Communique and what are the key asks that was developed and promoted and disseminated at COP27 last year, which we'd like to invite all of you, your experience and expertise and your thoughts and ideas today, just to have a conversation on those key asks and recommendations and to update that in the lead up to COP28. I think from yesterday up to today, we've heard a lot about the different issues and polycrisis that we are experiencing in the world today. So just a snapshot of the world in data. And we know that 40% of all species are on track to go extinct by the end of the century. So this is really a number that is frightening. And second is that we also know that global population will be around 11.2 billion by 2100. And this means that the additional people coming into the planet will put severe and extreme pressures environmentally, socially, economically, and so on. The IPCC has also mentioned that 33% of the global GHG emissions come from the food system. So when we speak of the food system, that's from the production side up to consumption or farm to fork, as they say. And animal products account already at the moment 72 to 78% of the total agricultural emissions. Really, really massive. And that's just thinking about today. And when we think about the projected growth and demand, you can already do the maths there. So the IPCC report back in 2022 already mentioned that even if fossil fuel emissions stop immediately, even tomorrow, emissions from the global food system alone could increase global temperatures by more than 1.5 degrees centigrade. So we've seen that in many years of climate negotiations, a lot of the debate has focused around fossil fuels, and food systems often has taken a back seat in these conversations. Food has always been like a difficult conversation for many countries. It is a very personal thing when we talk about food. It's about culture, it's about our personal choices, and taking that to a global platform like the UNFCCC is something that's, it's an uncomfortable place to be in. But in the past 2 years, we've really seen this movement towards thinking about course correction and how each of the different sectors can actually make a difference in correcting our path or reaching the path towards 1.5 degrees. So the key trends in Asia, again, just to reinforce some of these data that we've already heard, population growth along with urbanization and a growing middle class. It is estimated by the World Data Lab that by 2024, it will be the first time that there will be more middle class and rich category of people in Asia exceeding those that are considered poor or vulnerable. That means that there's a surge of more consumers able to purchase and have the power to make a difference through their choices. Second, we know that there's going to be an increase in meat consumption by 2030, around 10%. At the moment, Asia is already the largest meat producing region, accounting for 45% of total meat production. It's the biggest producer in aquaculture, and we know that this sector will continue to grow. There is increasing pressure, of course, on government to put strong policies around One Health approach. Mark earlier mentioned around work on the pandemics treaty and so on. And we're also seeing this trend of industrial livestock systems beginning to replace smallholder pastoralist and traditional livestock systems. So this is a worrying trend as, given where the money from multilateral development banks are, this focus on food security, that's actually prompting the development of more factory farms in this part of the world. So we know that GHG emissions from meat and dairy consumption will also grow quite rapidly over the next decades. We are poised to become the fastest growing importer of soy for animal feed. And a research by the Worldwide Fund for Nature, or WWF, also looked at 36 countries and their NDCs. So the NDCs are nationally determined contributions. These are targets within the climate plans of different countries. They mention livestock, but it's in the context of increasing emissions intensity. None of the NDCs or the climate plans make mention of sustainable diets at the moment. And there is a very significant gap in climate finance for food systems, agri-food systems. At the moment, it's at 4.3%. It's very, very small. And the Climate Policy Initiative estimates that that has to increase sevenfold to be able to really transform. Yeah, and we've heard as well, I think already the health impacts related with this destructive industry, how it impacts smallholders, food chain workers. In Asia, there are around 350 million smallholders. There's also this discussion around food sovereignty and, of course, the animal welfare concerns within these systems. And going back to like the keynote of Dave the other day when he mentioned that a shared mission of all of us is ending practices that create animal suffering and cruelty. And this is where we are going in, fighting the big battles around stopping factory farming based on climate grounds. Because we know that there are many entry points to the discussion, but now there is really that ripe opportunity with COP28 to bring this further. So last year, we held the 2022 Just Protein Transition Summit in Asia, together with 50 by 40. And essentially, this was an effort that was done to create a shared vision for Asian organizations, to create a vision for a just, sustainable, and humane food system. And before having the summit, there were dedicated pre-summit conversations to actually come up with this statement. And this looked at different stakeholders within the food system, ranging from your smallholders, the producers themselves. We also talked to the finance sector. We also talked to the health and medical sector, as well as those from the industry and so on. So it's really to bring that holistic view of what is the problem, what is the issue that we're looking at, and hoping to unite civil society actors working across the protein system in Asia. So 40 organizations joined this summit and helped co-create the statement, and this was presented at COP27. So just quickly, to look at what was the problem statement that we analyzed and discussed during that protein summit. So it's that current systems of protein production fail to guarantee access to safe and affordable food for all, nor does it provide an adequate livelihood for farmers engaged in local production. This failing system, supported by perverse financial incentives, is also fueling major global concerns, including the spread of disease, antimicrobial resistance, deforestation, climate change, and acute animal suffering. It is urgent to transition to a system of protein production that is just, humane, and sustainable. We also sought to debunk some of the myths associated with factory farming. Often when we talk to decision makers and policy makers, they always think that factory farms are like an innovation within the food system. There is this notion that factory farms, because of their industrial size, they're run by big, credible, quote-unquote companies, that they are more efficient and they are needed to feed a growing Asian population. Second, there's also that myth that factory farms are cleaner, more hygienic, and safer because we think that because they are run by these companies, then they are able to meet certain standards and certifications that are required. And the third myth is that factory farms are the future. So when we think about the global south, the majority global south populations, there's always that thinking that industrial, intensive is the way to go, because that was the development model that they've seen has fed the rest of the world. Just to give you a bit of flavor of the different organizations that supported the communique. So as I said, these are across Asia, and they come from different fields, from medicine, health, to think tanks, campaigning organizations. We have academic organizations, as well as other environmental and finance-based organizations, consumer organizations, and farmers organizations as well. So just to give you a summary of what were the key asks in the communique, and we'll focus on the call to action that we've made to member countries, because the way the communique was structured, and you will see it in the Huva app. If you want a reference, there's a document that has been uploaded there, which has the full communique there. But just for a focus for our workshop today, we will look at the actions for member countries. And the first one, of course, is to stop further expansion of factory farming in Asia, based on food justice, nutrition security, greenhouse gas reduction, and biodiversity protection. And the second is to adopt the goal to halve global animal protein production and consumption by 2040. And And just to elaborate that further, it's really connecting the climate crisis with biodiversity loss, food security, how it undermines food security, and the other issues associated like human health and so on. So what are the key recommendations as part of this statement? So for the first one is really, we would like to see governments to recognize the interconnected public health and planetary impacts of factory farming. And we'd like them to commit to ending or halting the growth of factory farming in this part of the world, or to leapfrog factory farming in this part of the world. Second is that climate finance should support a just transition in food systems. So this means that the finance needs to increase, that has been recognized, but also that needs to be redirected. At the moment, financing is going to industrial farms, but what we'd like to see is that growth and finance should actually support and be redirected towards just humane and sustainable food systems, which means more agroecological, more diversified types of production, or also investments in alternative proteins and so on. The third is that we recognize that when we talk about the just transition, it always needs to have the people also at the center of the conversation. As animal protection advocates, we of course want to see or create a better world for animals. But when we talk to policymakers and decision makers, a focus on people and ensuring that the most vulnerable and marginalized, and in our case within food systems, the smallholders and the producers, there must be mechanisms to support them to transition their systems towards a just protein food system. And then there is the concept of the transition must follow a common but differentiated responsibilities approach. So this is called in the climate discussion CBDR, and this concept is about the countries with a higher level of emissions must bear the responsibility of curbing their emissions first or further. And we have a leeway for developing countries to somehow incrementally get to a certain path towards that as well. So in the case of a protein transition, countries which have higher meat consumption, meat production and so on, should bear the responsibility of curbing their emissions first. The other recommendations are around national dietary guidelines, but making sure that the guidelines also brings in ethics and sustainability within that framework. So it's not just looking at nutrition per se, but looking at the overall principles that guide those guidelines. How does it support a pathway towards a just transition should also be part of that. Mentioned earlier, adopting the One Health and One Welfare approach to look at or to respond to the issues around factory farming and public health. And the next one around engaging the global medical community around nutritional education. And finally, around protecting the tenure of landowner rights and indigenous peoples who we know are at the forefront of protecting nature and animals at that. So what we'd like to do, World Animal Protection will be at COP28 in Dubai, together with organizations like ProVeg, Mercy for Animals. We will have a Food for Climate Pavilion, so we are a co-host of that pavilion. And we have lined up several events and activities that can promote the discussion and raise the awareness of stakeholders and policymakers around the issue of industrial farming. So what we'd like to do today, given your experience and expertise, and also ideas, because I know that some of the attendees here might not be actively working on the climate issue yet, but you may have questions that can actually help us rethink and improve and refine this communique. We'd definitely love to hear that from you. So, in addition to what was discussed earlier, these are some key trends also that I think needs to be pointed out. So, a shift in demographics around the region towards less meat consumption. There's the younger demographics are more open to exploring different diets, vegan, flexitarian, Mediterranean, whatsoever. That's already happening. We can also build on Asia being a place where there's a rich culinary tradition of plant-based diets already. This history of innovative meat alternatives, tofu, tempeh, etc. But also to say that there's also this worrying trend that we're seeing being funded nowadays, which is the expansion of what started in China as the multiple-story factory farm model, which they say we're not expanding the land use or changing much of it, but they've done these several stories of factory farms, and we're seeing that it's expanding in areas like Vietnam and even in Europe. There have been discussions of this model being adopted there, so that's worrying, especially from an animal welfare and climate change point of view. So this was what I mentioned earlier about really why do we want to do this and why the climate talks. So this global stocktake is going to end at COP28 in Dubai, and the global stocktake that's happening there is the first time countries are coming together to really look at how they've performed against the Paris Agreement and their goals. So from this global stocktake, we're actually going to see the areas where countries are weak at, and we can also see and have recommendations how to course correct or be able to reach better climate pledges by the second round of you will see 2025 as the milestone year where countries will be asked to submit their third round of climate pledges. So we have that time frame as a collective movement to work with our governments to enhance their NDCs and to input or include food systems and agriculture-related NDCs there. And then the second global stocktake will happen by 2028. So what has the global stocktake so far said about agriculture and food systems? You will see here, this is the main outcomes or recommendations to enhance climate ambition. So you will see there, of course, shifting away from fossil fuels and ramping up renewables. But you will also see that for the first time, there is a recognition that transforming agriculture, food systems, and halting and reversing deforestation by 2030 will be key. There's also a recognition there that demand-side measures, looking at more sustainable, healthy diets, that's the terminology that's used by the IPCC, because there was this discussion to put plant-based diets, but there are many countries, including Brazil and Argentina, who were uncomfortable by using plant-based diets, and hence it became sustainable, healthy diets. But that encompasses vegan, vegetarian, flexitarian diets, and so on. There's also this concept of intensifying sustainable agriculture, quite paradoxical when you try to listen to it, but it's really in the definition of what is sustainable intensification of agriculture, it's using less space and less conversion and deforestation of land. So using a small space to create more food or produce more food, but being environmental at the same time. Whether that's really possible, it's a question, but that is now a terminology that is floating around within the climate talks, which of course, as people who campaign against intensive agriculture, we're kind of like, what is this about? And there's also this discussion around making finance commitments and shifting financial flows so that they support the Paris Agreement. So within development banks at the moment, just to share, there is what we call a joint approach on Paris alignment. And they define which industries are Paris aligned and which are not. At the moment, they consider non-ruminants as Paris aligned. So ruminants sorry. So they recognize that ruminants are intensive, climate intensive. It's a high emissions industry, but non-ruminants at the moment is Paris aligned. So that is really worrying for us because we know that some of the non-ruminants are already becoming the most factory farmed animal products out there. So the other opportunity is this COP28 Leaders Declaration. So this is really happening. So at this very moment, the UAE has already circulated to your different ministries a copy of this declaration. And this declaration will focus really on how food systems can contribute to the climate goals. And this means aligning national food system strategies with the NDCs, your adaptation plans, and national biodiversity strategies. So that's what they're asking of these governments. Second, there's a desire by the UAE to recognize the different governments already doing great work in this space. There's a focus on producing initial financing for food systems transformation. And also, there is this focus on advancements, which again is a worrying thing for us, where advancements can mean anything from technology to innovation and possibly greenwashing at that. And lastly, there's that focus that food systems responding to climate impacts and making sure that it's just, meaning it protects livelihoods and so on. So what is really the focus, or what is behind this focus on the food systems by the UAE? We kind of know why. They don't want fossil fuels to be the main discussion at the COPs later this year. But for us as animal welfare advocates working in this space and working with the climate movement, this is really an opportunity for us to raise our voices. But at the same time, we need to also still work with the fossil fuel movement, because there is a direct relationship between food systems and fossil fuels. Fossil fuels fuel the intensive factory farming model as well. So for our workshop today, we're kind of running out of time, but hopefully we can spend around the next 15 to 20 minutes within different groups. We just like to get your views and thoughts about why this is an important topic for you, what stands out for you in that communique. Is there a recommendation there that you think you can promote as on behalf of your organization? Because we would like a concerted movement around this. So you might not be working on COPs yet and so on, but at the local level, we can synergize our actions to have or amplify the voice that we have. So some of those recommendations, we also want to hear what you think are the challenges about associating animal welfare and climate change, the just transition, sustainable diets conversation, and what joint activities do you think we can do together as well. So maybe we can just ask Nong and Mark, we can create two groups here for just a short discussion in the next maybe 15 to 20 minutes on the communique. So what's missing there?
From the top.
All right. Time is up. And may we hear a few words from each group about your key highlights from that discussion.
So, so wow. Okay. There was a lot of exchanges here. One is on, I'll just go around, right? Youth has been identified as a major issue, that in some governments, the problem is passed on to the NGOs. That's not our problem, and you know, sort it out. There's a common theme around economics, jobs, providing benefits to people if you're trying to address these problems. And I think there's also challenges on trying to link some of the issues we talked about towards, you know, opportunities in the climate space. There's a lot more which I will try to address. I do have a suggestion, actually, very clear suggestion, and I will speak in your behalf. A lot of our colleagues here have not signed on to the communique. So I think we have 40 organizations around Asia. We also have some in Africa who've done that. What probably would be good is to create a platform of information exchange really soon for folks to sign up to find more about it so that they can decide if they want to be a part of this. Because I think the other thing that would be good to know is how can some of what you talked about, Angel, is relevant to the work that our colleagues here are doing. Because I think that is the most important thing. It's not just about signing on to something, but it's to also make it relevant to what you are also focusing on. I think based on what you have discussed now, I'd love to have more time with you because I think, I'm not saying there's a solution for everything, but there are pathways to address all of what we have said here. And I think that exchange might create that opportunity for us to share information and see how we could work together. Right? Thank you.
Is this on? Yeah, so with respect to the first question, I think there were a few top-down approaches that we discussed with respect to institutional investors and getting them on board to make the switch versus some bottom-up approaches where we looked at working with farmers and getting, like better welfare practices. But then also there was like this sort of like, how do you counterbalance welfare with like, welfare goals will not help countries achieve their climate goals. So there needs to be a shift, like a proper shift and transition. I think eventually we also spoke about transformation, where we spoke about how welfare and working with farmers can eventually create a platform to, transition farmers into plant-based agriculture and then work with plant-based companies and, create collaborations on that end. And then with respect to key obstacles to getting key policymakers on board, I think one of the biggest takeaways I think that we ended with is not just working with the Ministry of like Animal Husbandry or farmers or whatever, and working with the Ministry of Health and Nutrition and, getting more coalitions, working with many different stakeholders and then presenting evidence so that we can get those government institutions on board and they may even have more power to influence change. I think mostly.
All right, thank you so much. So I think there are maybe 2 to 3 key actions from this workshop. So the first one is really to continue the conversation and for us to send over to you the full copy of the communique so that you can review it and see if you'd like to endorse it as well. There's also this very good point raised here around possibly an additional ask in the communique is around this coordinated approach that's needed from our governments, given how complex food systems are and how many actors are involved there. You have your agriculture department, your environment and natural resources, health, science and technology, and so on. So that's a clear one to be added right there. So we'd love to continue the conversation with you. If you can drop your emails through the Hoover app, maybe directly to me. I'd love to send the communique over to you. I don't know, Mark, if you had other final remarks that you'd like to say at this point. All right. Okay, yes, and in the app as well. All right. Okay, so with that, thank you very much. And I don't want to be the barrier between lunch and you. So go ahead and let's continue talking. Thank you so much for attending.